Yeah.
Hey, so Jonathan, it's great to get this time with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I wanted to talk about today is your Manhattan rental report. And the reason is that you published your January report, and it got picked up by the usual news channels like CNN and CNBC, financial news, and the ones that generally cover your stuff. And then it got also picked up by Curbed, which is also a well-known publisher. But in that post that was published on Curbed, it was framed more like a kind of personal investigation. A totally different take than what a news, typical or more traditional news outlet would have taken. And it was a bit of a conspiracy theory piece, right?
Yeah. It had a lot of people scratching its head. It was really well written. Like, it was a good read. Like, the writer is talented, but it seemed like it had like 7 or 8 sections, and every section said, I know this probably isn't right, but here's what I'm thinking. And then they do that like 8 times. So, the reader at the end, you're like, oh, okay. So no one ever came back to New York. I mean, that was like the takeaway. It was somewhat odd. And what was the interesting thing for me was, I talked to a lot of media, I'm talking to background, interviewing, whatever, not for public disclosure. And there were several large news organizations like national, that were looking at this article and wanted to like write more about it or have articles like that on that topic of people not rushing or flooding back to the city. And yet it was kind of based on nothing. So I was kind of like taken aback by how viral that piece actually went.
Right. Well, then, I mean, it was viral enough that The Real Deal, right, which is probably the largest trade publication for the real estate community here in New York, wrote a response, really a takedown, kind of point by point, right?
Yeah. It was really like it was like, hey, this has gotten a lot of attention, but it isn't right, and here's why. Unfortunately, right at the end, they had to publish a correction for the misspelling of the Curb writer's name.
I think that might have been on purpose, actually.
Oh, you think so?
A little
kid, that could be. Conspiracy theories, you just never know.
I'm just teasing. Yeah. And then after that, then Inman, right, which is a national real estate trade publication, followed up again, responding to the Real Deal piece, and then also weaving into it some of the responses that were on Twitter.
Right.
And so we've kind of had this ongoing, media thing about that emanated from your report. Manhattan January rental report.
Right.
And so what was interesting to me, I mean, there's a few things. One is this incredible way in which information disseminates, right? So when news sources like New York One or CNN or CNBC reference your report, it says as reported by.
Yeah.
But then as it emanates across, right? Mm-hmm. That original reporting goes away.
Right. And so every iteration where they're referring to the prior article, they're not referring necessarily to the source. And the further you go away from the source, the more diluted sort of the linkage is to where it actually came from.
Right. And right now, like we're all going, like I've been using ChatGPT to write blog posts. I'm like, oh my God, who am I plagiarizing here?
Right, exactly.
That's just another layer away.
Have to be worked out. Sure.
So I wanted to take a step back and talk about how the report is actually generated. Like how do you do it? How is the sausage made?
Besides just pressing a button and it just pops.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful for people to understand that. And then secondly, how does the information get, from your laptop out into the world? What is the process by which that's done? So that's what I wanted to focus on today.
Sure. That's all, we're sort of in this quest for transparency, right? Like where the data flow is and how it's interpreted. So my literally, my goal with any of the reports, and I publish, or rather I author, hundreds for Douglas Elliman. The rental report is one of them, a lot of quarterly sales reports, and then this, and I have the exact same methodology for all of them in terms of how do you get it out? Like, what do you do? And some are more, have a bigger following than others, right? So the rental report in New York City is very popular, and so is the Manhattan sales report, very popular.
They move the needle. They move the market.
Yeah. And so the responsibility is to make sure that you're telling, you're conveying the information in the right context. And so just one thing, and this is something that was in the rental report sort of release or narrative, is, I've noticed over the last year that we have that sort of the national real estate coverage has been far more negative. Not that I'm trying to be positive, but far more negative than I think what's happening on the ground. And so the reason for that is, and this is maybe more about the sales market, but just to sort of, how do I think about this, is that the year-over-year look is wildly distorted. I mean, I've seen your charts on, comparing, 22 to 21 and 19 and 18, and I have similar charts, and it's like, it was 21 was a rocket ship, but 22, everybody's doing year-over-year comparisons to 21. So of course, sales activity fell X% and leasing activity fell X% and double digit and huge numbers. Yet, I've been espousing forever that year over year is the way you control for seasonality, right? I mean, and so it's not that it's not credible. It's like, I'm not a robot. Like, we're looking at this and saying, hey, this is like wrong. This is a mischaracterization. So anyway, that's just sort of to lay the sort of background, the way I think about it. And so, rental data is not public record. And through the combination of my, affiliation since, I'm afraid to think how long it's been. It's been a couple of years. It's been like 3 decades with Douglas Elliman, 1994. So it's almost 1994 is when I first started working on this. So we have data from Douglas Elliman, from the Real Estate Board of New York. I'm a member as an appraiser. We have lots, and then there's other sort of sources that come into those sources. And my belief is, so there's a difference when you do a report, like when you're doing like the stuff for Marketproof, you're trying to show like a definitive count of how many new construction contracts are signed or whatever, that's what you're trying to do. I'm trying to build the right trend, the housing trend. So for example, the rental report or a sales report, January ends, but the data flow from January doesn't end on January 31st, right? There's data you could trip into a month, 2 months later, but it's not relevant. I mean, it is relevant, but I'm not going to wait 3 months to publish a January rental report.
The methodology is so during this time period.
Right. It's very robotic, like where you do things the same way. It's for, we publish in 40 different markets, U.S. housing markets in the U.S. The reports are used by the Fed and all kinds of alphabet soup of Washington, D.C., HUD, FHA, organizations like that. And they use it because we have like a consistent methodology, which is, collect the data, clean the data. There's a lot of garbage, rentals for 10 cents and, stuff like that. And then we have a model that we built that pushes, the data through and, sorts and slices and dices it so we can break things out by bedrooms and by, quintiles and whatever, we sort of run it through, and we have a lot of expertise for that because we do so many different markets, and inevitably every month or every quarter there's a data problem you have to figure out, so it's not fully automated.
So the data is hand reviewed.
It's hand reviewed.
Anomalies are cleaned or corrected or discarded.
Yes, as best we can, right? We're going through it. And maybe my tragic flaw for somebody doing this is that I insist on doing that, a lot of that myself, because that makes me able to talk about the market in more color than just looking at the results and saying, hey, it's up 13%, it's down 12%.
You're not just a guy on TV.
Right, exactly.
You're really doing the work.
Well, it's the idea of enriching the story to make it so that it is relatable and understandable. So we put all the data, we crunch the numbers, I write my analysis, and then when I first started doing the market studies in the early 90s or mid 90s, back then, the only way publications would write about your report is if you gave them an exclusive. Like whatever publication, like they weren't interested in this, they were the only one. And I said, I can't do that because then we're not neutral. So I want it to be like easily disseminated. And then I decided.
So you maintain a relationship directly with reporters?
Yes. You
don't have handlers?
No. And part of the way to think about it is that, we're trying to put things out at the same moment in time so that everybody has a fair shot to cover it, right? Or if they're interested, they cover it and they don't have a timing leverage over something else, which brings in another problem where and this is something I noticed right in the beginning, that like print media is a day behind online or blogging, right? Or more, right? But just, at a bare minimum, if a print outlet talks to you today, they can't publish it on the paper until tomorrow. But if you're talking to a newswire or somebody else, they don't have that same sort of mechanical restriction. So I created an embargo system.
So you write your report, you have a distribution list of reporters.
Yes.
That are on that list.
Yes.
You click send.
Not quite yet. So before I had to build that list, their outlet has to agree to the embargo concept. And listen, no one's perfect. I've probably had a half a dozen violations and they fix it, but it's always like
a mistake,
a communication disconnect. It's not, no one has ever been completely hey, I don't care about, what's right and wrong. We're going to get the scoop or whatever. There's never been any of that stuff. Everything has been very high level in terms of trust and integrity. But, probably half a dozen times outlets have made a mistake. And when I reach out to them, it's fixed immediately, like taken down, or if they can't take it down, we have a meeting to sort of talk about how this can never happen again. And then it never happens again. Right. So the reason why I'm spending time on that is because that's really important to me.
Yeah. And I think people need to understand the way you're doing it is not how it's typically done.
Well, all I care about is everybody gets it at the same time, print and online. And then, I make a list. I actually work a lot with Elliman's PR people too, because the reports are all done in their name. So reporters will reach out to them and said, hey, can you add me to your distribution list? And they'll explain sort of the embargo concept. And then I maintain a list, and I maintain which geographic location, and then when people ask to take it off, we take it off. They've switched beats and they don't need the emailer anymore or whatever. And so it's this living, breathing. Actually, I learned that from a PR company that a friend of mine who ended up moving to Australia 20 years ago, but I'm still using his spreadsheet that he built for me to maintain this.
So you are acting as your own PR firm.
Yes, I don't have any PR.
Right. And so this reporter from Curb could be on your list.
Yes, I honestly don't know if they are or not, but we weren't included in I don't think we were in that one. We're just in the Real Deal one, so they didn't include me for whatever. And I don't remember the name. I mean, I could have talked about it, you know.
You don't
I-
know. All right.
I
So,
don't.
all right. So there's a very transparent way in which you disseminate the reports.
Yes.
All right. And so, and then
So the morning of the embargo day. So typically the way it works is typically the reports are generally published on a Thursday. Douglas Elliman publishes the reports on a Thursday. The press day is the day before. So it gives everybody the same opportunity. And then some firms will release it at midnight, 12:01 midnight on Thursday. Some will release it in the morning. They all have their own strategies. Some won't release it until the afternoon of the, everybody has their own, but I don't care. Like it doesn't matter.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So so kind of zooming in on this rental thing, these rental prices kind of struck a chord.
Sure.
Across our little, socioeconomic,
Yeah.
issue that got highlighted because of this increase in the rental prices.
Right.
So before, I just want to take one more step
Sure,
back
sure.
and get into that for a second. So how does the data get from, a leasing room or table or where, a countertop where a lease is signed, to whatever channels it's going through to get into your spreadsheet? Because here in New York, right, we, REBNY, the rental asking prices are pretty well known.
Mm-hmm.
But what stuff is leased for is not very well known.
Right.
So, one of the things that you talk about is the discount between the asking rent and the signed rent. How just walk me through like how that happens? How do you get from signing table to report?
Right. So with our affiliation from firms, we get the closed rental prices. For the data that we don't get, which is a smaller part of the overall data, we take the relationship between ask and actual and apply that to the ones that were leased, but we don't have the hard number. So it's probably a 70-30 split where 70 we have and 30 we don't. It could be less, sometimes more. And so some of the data that goes into is the closing prices estimated. However, in the last 5 years, there's hardly any difference between, it's a very low difference between the actual and what it's asking. And in fact, in the last couple of years, it's been 20% of the listings are actually bidding wars.
Right.
Because they're actually leasing.
Important point.
They're leasing higher than the landlord is asking because there's a problem. There's a supply problem.
Bring up I think a really important point, which is that the negotiability is really low.
Oh yeah, very low. And back to my sort of philosophy versus what you're attempting to do with your Marketproof is that I'm trying to show the trend.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can assume things, apply what we learned from a whole bunch of closings to what we don't know, because if we do it the exact same way every month for 15 years or 20 years, I mean, I have rental data going back to the early 90s. If we do it the same way every time, then we build a proper trend. That's the philosophy.
This is a really important point, because before we jumped on this call, I went over to Streeteasy and I checked their asking rent trend. I looked at their trend, and their number is very, very close to yours. So in your report, and the thing that kind of lit everybody up, I'll just share my screen here for a second, was this number right here,
4,097.
97. And Streeteasy's price is pretty close to that, but on the asking rent, not on the what it actually rented for, is a hair higher. So it just passes the obvious test of these things are pretty close to each other. Yeah,
sure.
But they don't publish, or maybe they don't know what stuff actually rented for.
Yeah, in many ways, I know this sounds cavalier, but it doesn't really matter that much in this market because it's so tight.
Yeah.
So if it's $20 off, does that
Yeah.
really matter in terms of building a trend when you do it the same way all the time, or it's $3 off? It's
Okay.
funny, that rental price that you pointed out, the 4,097, I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
That's like, the second highest is like $1 more,
Mhm.
and then the next one, the all-time record is like, $50 more.
Right.
Like it's very tight. And the reason it's very tight is because it's, you have a market with a vacancy that's very low.
All right. So let's dig in just a little bit into that for a second. So the number of leases that are actually paying these numbers is actually quite small as a percentage of the total.
Of total apartments in Manhattan.
Right.
Yeah, of course. About 75% of the rental apartments have statutory tenants in Manhattan.
Mhm.
So we're just looking at, what we believe to be in a universe that are not rent stabilized or rent
Well,
controlled.
even of market rate rentals.
Yeah.
It's still a small number,
Absolutely.
right?
Yep. Because it's not public record. And the reason that it's small is that small relative to the total is because you can only see in Manhattan about a third of rental activity on a good day. And the reason for that is because the rental market is split out by new leases, which are what we cover. All market reports cover that across the United States, and renewals. And renewals are the secret sauce that landlords manage their businesses with, and they do not share that data. That is their proprietary, reason for being. And yet it's 2/3 of the market, at least in Manhattan and a lot of other rental markets I'm familiar with. So it's the majority of rentals are renewals.
And your point is there's no visibility into the renewals.
None, unless you are a landlord and you can see your own buildings.
Mhm.
And that's it. Right. And that's not shared. You can't even extract it out of, public filings or anything. It's all lumped together. Like it's not for sharing. So in the rental market, what we're trying to understand is, at least on the new leasing, and a new lease doesn't mean new construction. It means you have, a different party come into an apartment and they sign a lease. That's what we're looking at. And so we're tracking new leasing data, which is, again, like we're taking percentages of percentages of percentages and trying to build, a trend.
Okay. So I think these are, really important points that I'm not sure are that well understood.
Yeah, it could be.
So it's a big number, but it's a small portion of what's out there, even a small portion of market rate.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a small. So it's a small of the total,
Turnover.
but it's plenty large enough to indicate a trend. There's a randomness to
a few $100 million a month.
Yeah, but
no,
sooner or later that's real money, I guess. But it is, but that's not what this is designed to do. Like, you're thinking in the context of having like an absolute accountability for all the transactions. Like, that's how you're thinking about it, and it can't be done.
Mhm.
Like, it is impossible. It doesn't matter whether we're in San Francisco or Seattle or Manhattan or Brooklyn or Queens. That's the way the rental market operates. It's so much different than the purchase market.
Okay. So let me take another angle on this. So I looked at how many rental listings there are as of today, across a few different websites. I looked at Elliman, and there was 5,548. Corcoran, there was 5,120. Compass, 5,917. And Streeteasy, 6,434. What's going on there? Why so much variation?
Well, so the Streeteasy is the outlier because they count inventory, and the same thing with the sales. They count inventory differently than everybody else does. So the way to think about inventory, so Streeteasy counts it as if in that month, that listing could have been an active listing, for an hour, or for most of the month, it's counted. And so it can be higher. Whereas the way we do it and the way everybody else does it is they basically look at what the total was at the end of the month, like how many there were. And that's the number for the month of, say, January. It's not that something on January 3rd popped in and was active for, a day or two. Right. Mm-hmm. It's really looking at the end of the period. And then you measure every end period, and that's how you build your trend. There's no other way. In fact, people don't generally realize, like in any market study that is done, the hardest historical by far is to build inventory trends, because you can't go back in time, because the status of that record, whatever system you're using, has pivoted from something that's available to something that's leased or taken off the market.
It's yes, as a software company, we've tried to do those things. It's a pretty high hurdle. It's
very difficult. Yeah.
All right. So I just actually learned something that I did not know. And I think most people don't know. Part of my perception, which I'm gonna have to go back and rethink, is that many rental listings are only posted on Streeteasy and nowhere else.
Correct.
So, but what you're saying means that isn't the only reason why the Streeteasy number is so much higher.
Right. The methodology is is different. And the same thing with the purchase. They get a lot more, they got a lot more inventory during the pandemic than everybody else did, because their methodology is different. And I'm not criticizing it. It's just different. Yeah. Like it's a different way to look at it.
I'm in the business. I didn't know that until right now.
Yeah. Right.
So I think, so that's super interesting. So, all right. So how are people going to understand these things? These are very technical issues.
Right. So one of the things that we do is in every report, at the bottom of every report, whether it's a rental or purchase report or a 58-page report or a 2-page report, is we have a methodology link on the bottom of the last page, and it's on our website. And I maintain a methodology. It's maybe not as granular as what we had the discussion of, and but it's an attempt to again provide transparency. Like one of the things over my career that's really annoyed me is when you see something that's built with a black box and you can't understand, so you can't make a decision whether it's credible or usable, right? Like the Case-Shiller index is a black box, besides other flaws for housing.
Topic for another video, right?
Yeah, that's a 5-hour one, but anyway, I think the point is provide as much clarity as you can. I get lots of questions about and feedback from the brokerage community about the rental market, and it really helps me think about things for the next time, because when we talk about how to do a rental report, that's not really the question. The question is, how do you put the results out there in a neutral way that you interpret what happened? How do you do that, right? And that's, I don't know how you do it. You be well read, and you understand the raw data, and the whole, what I look at, and this is what the brokerage community is trying to do, is they want to understand the market. So then we sit down at a Starbucks and they talk to somebody over a cup of coffee about why this rental is a good deal or why it isn't. They want to understand, more than just, hey, this one apartment that they're looking at. They want to sort of give context around it, and that's hopefully what the rental reports that I author.
You're an independent third party, even though you publish through Douglas Elliman.
Yeah.
Publishing your own reports, you're doing your own research.
Well, the great thing about Douglas Elliman is I've been doing, as I said, I think earlier, I've been doing them since 94. And the number one rule for me was they never, ever, ever, ever can, apply any influence or pressure. The only thing they have control over is the graphics. The name of the report has their name on it. And they've always been honorable about that, because they recognize that their clients want neutral information about what's going on. And they, it provides, so in a good market, I'm a good guy. In a bad market, I'm the bad guy, right? And I don't care. It just whatever is, what is the state of what's happening right now.
So right. And I just want to circle back to one thing. So I get asked a lot about, well, do you have rental information about what things actually leased for? And what you're telling me is in the macro, it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't. It doesn't. Like, everybody's looking at market reports the wrong way. Mm-hmm. Like, and one of the things we say in like the footer of all the report is like, it's like trend, it's the word trend. And I remember I was taking an appraisal class, I don't know, in the early 90s. And the professor said, the trend is your friend.
Right.
Until it ends.
Right.
Anyway, so that's the goal. And so when you look at all the data that you're collecting, and the goal is the trend, mm-hmm. not a repository of every single transaction, which is like counting grains of sand, really, because when you think about it, even in the sales are public record, rentals aren't. You can't get every sale in a period unless maybe you wait 10 years, because there could be a piece of litigation where the transaction hasn't been recorded yet and you don't know about it. And we've had plenty of that type of situation. Everybody has this sort of absolutism about like public record, and public record is, better than me, is super dirty, right?
Deeply flawed.
It's deeply flawed. And there's this sort of like aspiration, like it counts for everything. And to me, I focus on the trend.
Well, just to make a little joke out of what you're saying, in our software, we have Wells Fargo and we have Wells Frago. You can't imagine how many, deeds are recorded, mortgages are recorded saying Wells Frago.
Amazing, right? Yeah. Like, is that reviewed? Like, no right?
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So I think this is important stuff. Let's take and I know we're getting a little long here, but let's just do one more quick little thing on.
I have a 5-hour limit on this kind of stuff, so you're fine.
All right. Let's just talk about where we're at with the rents and why people are reacting the way they are.
Okay. Right.
So why is this, why are people reacting to these rental numbers?
Well, so I never miss an opportunity with either my students at Columbia or media or anybody tell a dad joke with that. And the way I think of the rental market, what I was saying was, the opposite of rising rents isn't falling rents, yet, it's really stabilizing rents. And so what we saw this big rocket ship buildup of rental prices in Manhattan in 2021. By the fall of 21, we got to parity with pre-pandemic. Even though, it's going straight up to the moon, it's still, we were focused on getting back, to the where we started, from the pandemic. And once we did, then everything after that, sort of 22 into to now has been like extra credit, right? And so, it last summer in July for Manhattan rents, I could see it coming. It felt like we were going to see a peak, and I could see it coming because we were seeing like a decline in bidding wars and a decline in concessions. You could see all these other indicators suggesting, price is always like the last thing. It's like the caboose on the end of the train, if they're, even though trains don't have cabooses anymore. It's like after the dust settles, right?
Yeah.
And so you could see it was going to happen. I thought it would happen in August, but it peaked actually in Manhattan in July. And then like the expectation was, oh, good, rents are going to get affordable. And I was like, what is going to bring rents down? We have a vibrant regional economy. We have mortgage rates, double now what they were a year ago. So many people that were going to buy are pushed into the rental market, making rents, at least stay the same or not decline. And so, my other sort of dad joke to this was I called 2023 the year of disappointment.
Right.
Because, renters and purchasers are going to, disappointed that they're not seeing a tremendous improvement in affordability. And then, landlords and, home sellers may not get the rents or the prices that they had in 2020, they enjoyed in 2021. So I think the takeaway here is that, rents are moving sideways, and it's frustrating for many, because, affordability is, so important. But I can rest assured, I was reading, or I wrote an article like a decade ago for Douglas Elliman when they became 100 years old. I remember reading New York Times articles in the early 1920s, the archives, classifieds on the real estate market, and people were complaining about international demand, affordability, and talking about how important Wall Street was to the real estate market. It was like if I had put that article with a 2022 or 23 headline, it would almost read like you would know that it was written in the early 20s. So there's some things don't seem to ever go away, and affordability challenges in New York is, I'm not downplaying it, but it's actually detrimental to New York City to have lack of affordability so that workers can live in the city. Like, that's not a good thing. But on the other hand, the distance, back 100 years shows how wildly difficult the challenge is to create affordable housing for the city. My job with what I do is just to convey, without the reader having to make a calculation, oh, he's conservative or he's optimistic. I just want to be right in the middle, show as best I can. That's all I care about.
Your kind of overarching point is this is a problem that has persisted for a long time.
A long time, for sure.
Decades.
Sure. There's no simple solution. Last administration in New York tried, there's talk about this administration. There isn't one solution. It's got to be many, but that's not what I do. I'm not.
You're not a government official here.
Well, I'm not also, I don't necessarily have deeply understood insights about what makes housing more affordable, other than build more of it. Right. Yeah. Tax credits and all that kind of stuff is really not what I do. So I'm not an expert on that. What I think I'm an expert in is housing trends.
Yeah.
And that's all I pretty much care about on the topic.
Okay. So then people take the trend line, and going back to what we said in the beginning of this call, some people just going to report on where we're at in the trend and what the absolute numbers are. And then other people are going to look for explanations and react to it in a more emotional way.
Tell the story, that's all. What I care about is enable somebody to tell the story of the market in the right context, as opposed to sort of quoting numbers up and down and sideways. Like, what does it mean? And that's my goal.